So good evening. My name is Ashley Dinges, and I would love to welcome you to tonight's live online weekly Dharma gathering hosted by Shambhala Online. Tonight's session is Deadly Force, Men, Power, Shame, and Insecurity with our teacher, Roland Mendiola. We'll begin tonight with a guided meditation, followed by a talk, and then we'll end with a Q&A discussion. And if this is your first time participating in a weekly Dharma gathering, you'll notice that the Zoom format is a little bit different. So we are using a webinar software. So you might not be able to see the other attendees, but we can see all of you. And the way that this works is nearing the Q&A section, you'll be able to ask a question either in the chat box, or if you'd prefer to come on camera, then you can use the raise hand function, and I'll remind you again when we get to that point how to use that functionality in order to ask a question. There is a document that goes along with tonight's talk, and I've pasted that link in the chat box. If you're watching the recording of this talk, you can find the link to the document in the My Programs tab, where you're watching the recording, and the link is posted or will be posted just under where the video is embedded. One other quick note that tonight's talk is being recorded, and all of the Q&A will be recorded as well too. So if you are coming on camera, please do know that we are recording, and we'll be recording you and your question. And then once again, the recording of the talk will be available within 24 hours on the My Programs tab in your Shambhala Online account. And there will also be an email sent out to you with the link and instructions for how to access tonight's recording. So with those logistics out of the way, it's my pleasure to welcome Roland Mendiola. Roland has been a practicing Buddhist since 2007, a student of Vipassana, Insight, and Chinese Zen before immersing in the Shambhala Boston community in 2009. He's held positions on his local board of trustees, the International Diversity Working Group, and the People of Color Council, and he began his teacher training in Shambhala in 2013. He's currently stepped back from formal teaching positions while the Sangha is grappling with harm from sexual power abuse by leadership. Currently, Roland works as a clinical psychologist in counseling services at Bowdoin College, lives with his son and partner, and co-leads a meditation group for people of color in Portland, Maine. So it's my pleasure to welcome Roland this evening, and I would invite you to please teach us.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Ashley, for that warm welcome and introduction. And just want to extend that warm welcome to everyone gathered. We'll start off with some meditation, which I know undoubtedly will help me as well in this moment. So hoping that will help you in some way as well. So we'll take a few minutes. I'll introduce the practice very briefly. We'll sit for a short period of time, maybe 10 minutes at most, 10, 15 minutes. And then we'll go into some amount of discussion. I'll lead a talk and lead us through some discussion as well. So thank you again for being here. This practice that we do, in the Buddhist tradition and the Shambhala tradition, we refer to oftentimes as mindful awareness or shamatha vipassana practice. And I often like to start introducing the practice by talking a little bit about the view or the purpose of meditation. Obviously, there are countless purposes we might employ for using meditation. And the one I like to bring up tonight really has to do with 2 points. One, just allowing ourselves to settle, to arrive, to be with ourselves more fully, allowing ourselves the space and time to do that. And then the second point has to do with, and this isn't something we need to necessarily intend for or be purposeful per se about, but something I like to refer to as just tapping into or getting glimpses of um, feeling into my okayness, just my basic, I'm okay, or where I'm at is okay, what I'm feeling or thinking is okay. And it might not even be that sort of cognitive, conscious, but just a sense of um, I'm actually okay in this moment, even if it's fleeting. And meditation can be a way of expanding that experience for us. So the three parts of meditation instruction include first, how I come into my body and come into a meditation posture. So really for our purposes, it's about finding your seat, what feels comfortable to your body. The intention is around something that feels comfortable and natural to your body. If you're sitting on the ground, it's helpful to be on a cushion to lift your hips off the ground a little bit, at least parallel with your knees, if not above your knees, your knee level. And this helps promote a natural curve to the spine. And there's a sense of both rootedness or strength in sitting and inherent dignity, as well as a sense of feeling open or receptive, um, feeling available to what's going on. And something that helps promote that is also the position of our hands and arms. The arms can be just falling naturally at our sides, and then the natural bend of the arm at the elbow. And our palms can just be placed on our thighs, just slightly above the knee. And this helps promote a sense of broadness, a sense of opening of and availability of our torso. And then the chin can be slightly tucked, and this helps elongate the neck. And the teeth can just come slightly apart. And the tip of the tongue can be at the back of the upper teeth. And this helps just promote a relaxation of the jaw and the face. And along with that, there can be just a relaxing of the eyes, allowing the gaze to be soft and cast downward, maybe 4 or 6 feet out in front. And allowing the eyeballs to really just relax into their sockets and allow the rest of the face, the brow, to have more ease. And it's often helpful just to take then a few moments to just allow yourself to arrive. And allow yourself to feel whatever is bubbling up. I'm coming with a lot of tiredness, a lot of fullness and busyness of a day. So really inviting ourselves. It's almost like I've heard certain teachers talk about drawing in this energy while we sit, both from above and also drawing from below as well, kind of find our place between heaven and earth. And then we use that same quality of embodiedness and attentiveness to bring our mind and place it on the anchor or object of meditation. And in this case, the sensation of breathing. So just feeling our bodies breathing in and out. The felt experience of our bodies breathing. Which allows our bodies to find their natural rhythm, their natural simplicity, as well as its aliveness. And then finally, we work with, as we work with the body and we work with the breath, we are also working with the reactivity of the mind and all the reactions that our mind is churning out about our experience, about our emotions, about our practice, about our lives. And really holding an intention of meeting that reactivity with openness and curiosity, as well as a genuine level of kindness. This is my mind. This is my mind's reactivity. And there's sort of no big deal kind of attitude we might meet that with. I don't need to push it away. I don't need to hold on to it. I don't need to ignore it. I can just allow it to arise, to be, and to pass very naturally. And then we simply return to the embodiment practice of feeling our bodies, feeling ourselves breathing. So we'll do that together for about 10 minutes. I'll just set a little timer for us. Good evening again. This is quite the gig. I have to say at the outset, pretty like wicked nervous, or at least I have been feeling that leading up to this. And then now I have to look at myself for the next half hour or so, which is like pretty much a nightmare for me. So you can probably tell, and I've just been trying to kind of own the nerves around this. This is, I guess I could say this is a lot for me to kind of digest for myself and unpack and try to share, and at the same time, I feel very committed to that. If nothing else, I wish it didn't take me so long to do this kind of thing. 40 years now, because I find myself frustrated. It's not a coincidence that I'm more and more willing these days to really explore my male identity and bring that conversation to others. Now that I'm a father, for one, and have a young son, but also with what's happening in the world, in our country, and in our Buddhist community. I know for myself, I get frustrated when I hear people's stories of how they came to justice work, and the judgments in my mind of like, really, it took you that to really step up and step in, as Arthi talked about in the first talk. And so I just wanted to honor that, but also I thought it was important to, as a way to talk about how I've come to understand doing diversity and inclusion work and increasingly justice and equity work over the years, where I'm really conscious for myself and for the people I see doing it, how much of a lose-lose situation it is. And I'm not even saying that in any kind of despairing way. Just the recognition that these forms of oppression and these social constructs that have been created over time and have a deep history, and were developed to really empower a select chosen few and disempower the rest, really, in my mind, was meant to be a lose-lose situation. Maybe not for the selected few, but I really experience that now. And I know so many people do too, where what I mean by that is that if you're going to venture into this work in any capacity, and there's lots of entry points, I believe. I think there are some important ones you make sure you enter through, and I'll talk about that in a second. But you're going to find yourself, at least in my experience again, in a lose-lose situation. And what I mean by that is you're not going to get it right. I've had so many failings at this. I've held so many spaces that were not, I feel like, useful or effective. Yeah, you're just gonna like fall on your face. You're gonna be torn wide open and feel desperately alone in it. And yeah, you just, I don't think you can genuinely enter in and expect to not be wrong a lot. So that's just, I feel like that's just off the table. And that naturally brings a certain level of anxiety and fear doing it. That's been my experience, and that's very much the path for me. And it's a lose-lose situation because you lose if you opt in certain ways, and you lose if you opt out in certain ways. They're just different ways. What I often like to say is, you're going to suffer either way. It's just a matter of how you choose to suffer. So with that, I wanted to kind of walk you through some of my process in trying to understand men, understand patriarchy, understand patriarchal masculinity. And if I'm feeling a little bogged down, you know, I mentioned all that stuff, I think, to just sort of let myself off the hook a little bit, let all of us off the hook a little bit, as well as just simply say we're all on the hook. So this is probably going to be a little messy. It's a work in progress, of course, and I probably was too aspirational in preparing and in my description. Yeah. So if I get bogged down, I'm going to open it up and ask some questions that I want people to maybe use the chat function to answer, before we get into some open Q&A and discussion. So first of what I want to say is, what does this all have to do with Dharma? Because I want to say I'm coming to this, and I'm speaking tonight as a man, someone who identifies as a man, as a cisgender man, as a straight heterosexual man, as a man of color, identify as Asian American, as Filipino American, as American, as a family partner, as a spouse, and who has a son, and I have a daughter on the way, who will be born this summer. And I'm very much coming into this as a Buddhist. It's very much a core part of my life. And so what does this all have to do with Dharma? I'm sure you've explored that in different ways and heard and seen things in different ways along these lines. So for me, what I want to say about that, I understand Dharma practice, and in a lot of ways, spiritual practice, as focused on two main intentions in my life. One is a celebration of goodness, a celebration of people's humanity. I think that's just focal in why we practice. And then the second, for me, is an interrogation of our deception, of our individual and collective deception. And I'm going to say various things about that. I'm like passionately interested in like how to get people to buy into justice work. It's sort of like my passionate interest about what the buy-in is for any kind of healing work, including doing therapy, working as a therapist. Like, what is the buy-in? And part of the buy-in for me has to do with this collective and individual deception. And basically rooting out our individual and collective hypocrisy. Rooting out the sense that, in my mind, that we very much fundamentally live a lie. Particularly, at least in my experience that I can speak to, living in this country, living in America, that we fundamentally live a lie. What I mean by that is, I don't think I'm going way out on a limb to assume that most of us, as much contention as we might have with how America exists, really at our core believe in a lot of the values of living in the US. In my mind, truth, the value of truth in freedom, in equality, and in multiculturalism. And that is in stark contrast in my experience with how we actually live day to day. And my clearest example, what I use in my work and what I use when I'm talking to young people about multicultural identity and doing workshops and retreats, I bring up this very simple line of questioning around people's experience growing up. And again, these are young people, these are college students. So this is still the world we live in today. I asked them, how many of you grew up in households or in communities or in friend groups where you talked very genuinely, very personally, very from the heart about various aspects of identity, about gender, about race, about sexual orientation, about class and money, but even seemingly benign things about like the identity of being married or the identity of like holding a certain job. And time again, I'm encountering groups where hardly any, and sometimes no one is raising their hands, maybe around some identities, but on the whole, very limited conversation. Just casual, open conversation about these things that we claim to have, to put so much value on and so much importance on in our life. We don't have basic conversations with people in our lives. People we're even closest to. Simple dialogue around what is it really like for you to be of such and such gender or such and such race or sexual orientation. So why I bring this up is that for me personally, I don't think you appeal to people's sense of injustice in a lot of ways by talking about racism or sexism. I think that ends up still being a very abstract idea for people. I think they can get it, but I don't think they feel it. So I guess I'm really interested in sort of appealing to people's sense of hypocrisy and lack of integrity. Like, you are not living the life that you claim to embody. And I'm speaking for myself as well. And that is troubling. And I think I bring that up especially amongst Buddhists who I believe put a lot of stock in, again, interrogating and rooting out deception in our lives. And what bigger deception, again, what bigger lie do we all live with than to live in this country and not address these matters in even just basic, benign ways. So that's one piece. The other piece that I think is important to mention in terms of buy-in is that I believe that many people at their core really strive for and prioritize connection as a lot of the purpose for why they do what they do in their lives. And my basic logic is that I don't think we can have genuine intimacy and connection in our lives if we are not exploring identity on a regular, consistent basis. What I mean by that is that if you really want to see and understand another person, you really have to understand who they are, and who they are in context, socially, historically. And so what that means to me, and I'm borrowing from an incredible person I trained with Jamie Washington, who practices and does trainings all over the country, but is based out of DC. And the basic logic there being, for me, if you're gonna prioritize connection, genuine connection in your lives, then you have to prioritize understanding identity, both in terms of people's personal subjective experience of identity, but also the historical context of identity. So if you're going to do that, then specifically in this country, I think we need to understand race and gender in particular, and all the various identities. But because historically, this country has systematically oppressed and dehumanized, devalued people according to race and gender, and that we built this country based on those things, we need to have a clear understanding of that. And by extension, we need to have a clear extension. If we're going to talk about race, then we have to talk about Black people. And to some extent, I think we have to centralize Black experiences, and I think we have to also, to some extent, centralize white experiences. Again, taking into account our historical context. And again, I think we need to understand both the experience of men and the experience of women, and by extension as well, the experience of other genders as well. So this is not about, for me, centralizing men's experience, talking about masculinity, talking about patriarchy. This is not about, in my mind, pitying men or demonizing men either. I think this is really about trying to find wholeness for all people. That's what I feel invested in. Before I get to some of that, I want us to maybe get on the same page. And Ashley mentioned this document that I put together, which you have access to. And it just is a collection of some of the material that I've gone over recently in my life, and a list of the resources that I'm pulling from. As I'm pulling in, as I'm trying to pull in specifically issues of race into this, I think it's important, as I'm saying, this is not about centralizing men. I think it's important, as we're exploring men's experience, to also not centralize white men's experience. And I think this is really where the work is evolving into, is really looking at the experience of men of color, of Black men, of Black feminists. And I think that's just the really exciting and powerful work that's being done out there. So in that vein, I wanted to kind of, you might be familiar with some of these notions and some of the research out there on men's psychology and traditional masculinity, but I wanted to put some out there for those who might not have it. So in that vein, I wanted to share some excerpts from Bell Hooks and her work, Understanding Patriarchy. So she writes, patriarchy is a political social system that insists that males are inherently dominating, superior to everything and everyone deemed weak, especially females, and endowed with the right to dominate and rule over the weak and to maintain that dominance through various forms of psychological terrorism and violence. I like to add here in another section on that, from that piece, patriarchy is the single most life-threatening social disease assaulting the male body and spirit in our nation. Yet most men do not use the word patriarchy in everyday life. Most men never think about patriarchy, what it means, how it is created and sustained. Until we can collectively acknowledge the damage patriarchy causes and the suffering it creates, we cannot address male pain. We cannot demand for men the right to be whole, to be givers and sustainers of life. Obviously, some patriarchal men are reliable and even benevolent caretakers and providers, but still they are imprisoned by a system that undermines their mental health. Patriarchy promotes insanity. It is at the root of the psychological ills troubling men in our nation. What I want to say there, and maybe gets to the heart of why I'm even doing this kind of presentation, is that, like others, I'm just going to be echoing others, like bell hooks, like Terry Real, like Mark Anthony Neal, who writes extensively on Black masculinity. This is trauma on men, but trauma collectively as well. And I'll go into different reasons of why that is the case in my mind. But the trauma of being basically the trauma of having parts of yourself cut out through our socialization process. And as a result of that, the traumatic response of always being in survival mode, and that I think is at the essence of patriarchy and patriarchal masculinity, is that we are on hyper survival mode all the time, not just men, but as a collective. I'm often, as I'm moving through my life, especially now, I'm like hitting these, landmark moments of life, of getting married and having kids and buying our latest house. And it's not, I think we're all becoming disillusioned in different ways of this paradigm and this dream of a good life. And I'm left oftentimes these days, like, sort of this weird sense. And, I especially try to understand this through the lens of being specifically an Asian American in this country, and sort of marginalized in certain ways, and then sort of unhealthily propped up in other ways. And feeling like, or wondering, when are we going to get off this survival mode of humanity? Like, we know how to survive. Why are we all acting like we need to keep trying to survive as if our lives are constantly at risk? But I think I think that is the state of patriarchy, and I think that's often, unfortunately, the state of a lot of young men and boys growing up in the world. So I want to go through quickly just some of the research when we're talking about, what are we talking about when we're talking about this socially constructed, institutionally backed form of power known as patriarchy, known as toxic masculinity, independent of an individual's sex. So obviously, as other people have talked about on this, in this series, anyone could be practicing and complicit with this structure and system. Avoiding and rejecting femininity, toughness or posing, stoicism, self-reliance, concealing, restricting, or control of emotions, prioritizing admiration and respect from others, employing violence, aggression, and risk-taking, attitudes of anti-gay heterosexuality, sexual dominance, and competition, success, achievement, and power being the focal points of one's life goals, but also one's sense of worth, I would say. And what is the literature out there say about the costs or the risks of people ascribing to this kind of masculinity? What we know from the research is that it leads to these impacts on health and well-being: maladaptive coping, stress and conflict, unemployment, poor health, including substance abuse, HIV and AIDS, stress-related illness, poor relationship quality, including emotional distance and distance emotionally and physically from other men, lack of involvement in parenting, sexual and other forms of violence and homicide. Men represent 80% of perpetrators of violent crime and also the victims of the majority of that violence. Intimate partner violence, aggressive driving, environmental degradation, overall quality of life, including health, safety, and education, and shame, isolation, and depression. And in terms of information, I want to end on this piece to centralize the experience, the effects of traditional toxic patriarchal masculinity on gay men specifically. So in one study, it shows the ongoing perception that gay men are insufficiently masculine, demonstrated that gay men feel vulnerable to threats to their sense of masculinity, that there is a distancing of themselves from feminine gay men and more identification with masculine gay men, and presenting oneself as more masculine than one feels. In another study focused on masculinity, muscularity, and HIV risk for gay, bisexual men of color, body image concerns and a drive for muscularity predicted greater sexual risk behavior. This included unprotected sex. Another study found that more preoccupation with masculinity and negative feelings about effeminate gaze was associated with general negativity toward being gay, a general sense of a negative attitude toward being gay. And then finally, one exploring domestic violence or intimate partner violence amongst gay couples, greater conformity to traditional masculine norms like aggression, suppression of emotional vulnerability, avoidance of dependency on others, was a significant predictor of perpetrating physical violence in relationships and using it as a way to respond to internal emotional conflicts. So I forgot to do this before, but a big shout out to all the folks who have contributed to this series so far. I've really enjoyed people's talks, and I really encourage folks to check them out. There's a lot of depth there. I think it was a couple weeks back, Duet Cullen speaking about the role of shame. So sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit. And I don't have too much more, or I don't feel like I want to go much more. How might we understand why this happens? Again, specifically, I'm gonna, for our purposes, centralize young men and boys. I think from a practice standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, I had this conversation with one of my male friends recently, like, why are men so attached to power? Why are they so often in positions of power, let alone have to abuse it? And for both of us, it really just resonated. It's because in our experience, as young boys, we really never get any kind of substantial messaging around, like, you are okay. I'm going back to, what I was saying about our meditation practice. Like, you are fundamentally okay as a young boy. If anything, you get the complete opposite messaging. What does it mean to be a man? It has to do with how you appear, how you hold yourself, how you talk, how confident and not anxious and nervous you sound, how you are physically, your physicality, your interests in things, how you engage with romance and friendships and sexuality, and what you do with your insecurities. I mean, it's endless. When someone asked me about it recently, like what it means to be a man, it's like I find myself feeling like it's embedded in everything almost that I do. And so the shame, I think, naturally kicks in for many, if not all of us, around this impossible standard. I mean, that's by definition part of toxic masculinity, that it is an impossible standard, even if we wanted to meet it, even for those who buy into it, that it is impossible. And the shame, the internalized messaging of, I'm not achieving those standards, so I must be faulty, I must be weak, I must be just worthless. And all my sense of all the ways I might measure my value and worth as a person are based on those things. Maybe I'll end for now with well, two things. I'll end with two things. Along some of these lines, I want to just touch on briefly, I just want to touch on sex, and how, as an example of how shame plays out, as an example of socially accepted and sanctioned patriarchy. That, and I'm not anti-sex whatsoever. I feel like a very sexual being. And I've had so much confusion about sex. Again, because it's not something we talk about growing up. It's not something boys or men talk about typically. So there's just a lot of confusion, a lot of mixed messaging, along with such strong social conditioning around around how you should perceive sex, about how you should perceive your entitlement to sex, and just loaded confusion around, like, I have all these feelings and desires, and I don't know what to do with them. I don't have any guidance. I don't have any positive messaging in the world about how to express that healthily. So I'm all about people exploring sexuality in all kinds of ways, with consent and with communication and with connection, whatever level that looks like. But again, we're not talking about this with our young people. And so that leads me just to saying, maybe at least touching on some of what I perceive as some of the ways forward. Similar to what other presenters have talked about, like Claudel and Arthi, this is about awareness work. This is about doing our personal introspection, interrogation through spiritual practices, through meditation and other means, about deep listening, about being in silence, being with ourselves as men and boys, discovering some of our intrinsic worth. And then from that, or along with that, I so firmly believe in the power of group work. I think about Bell Hooks's emphasis on consciousness raising group from the book Feminism is for Everybody. Just that paradigm was there for so long in the development of feminism, and then just was overtaken by academia. But this call for a return back to very simple, everyday, but available, accessible, consciousness-raising groups, I think in communities, in the education system, where both within genders and across genders, you can have these discussions. I really believe if we're talking about trauma and we're talking about shame, specifically, shame is a learned thing. It's a socially conditioned thing. And so it has to be unpacked and healed socially. That within groups, we can talk about our very personal experiences of what it was like growing up as men, growing up as boys, growing up as men. So I believe in conscious raising groups, both for safety and affinity, but also for challenging each other to see things from different perspectives. So we need older men, adult men willing to do this kind of work and engage young men and boys. But then also bringing in other genders, so young men and men in general have the experience of talking about these things in spaces that might not always feel so safe. And I think then within those contexts, as we often talk about, I think in Shambhala spaces, like the group wisdom emerges. By being able to be safe, to be yourself, to be open about things that are that one's carried maybe one's whole life with so much shame. And then I think naturally from that, people can start to feel into and share ideas and inspirations about the specific organized work that needs to be done out in the world, politically, educationally. So I believe in organizing. I believe in individual, group, and collective organizing around these issues. So, let's see. Before I get into like specific questions, I would love to just take a pause. I know I've been talking for a while. I would love to just take a pause and just have people kind of feel into, and I encourage folks if they want to use the chat feature here to like answer some just questions that I'm gonna put out there. And I encourage folks to just kind of like respond from just a immediate feeling place. In the spirit of having everyday kinds of conversations along these lines or around these kinds of issues, I want you to imagine having or initiating a conversation with a man in your life, someone who male identified. And let's say a man that you care about and love. I would love just people's responses, like, what is it like to even just notice reactions to approaching that man in your life with questions about, let's not even get into specific, just like that, that you're going to bring up, like, what is it like to be a man? What does it mean to be a man to you? I'm just curious if anyone, and I can read them aloud if people want to type anything. And if not, that's okay too. Okay. So why don't I pause for now and just see if there's any questions or comments or reflections. I have one from Jake, which says, do you have a suggestion on how to make a safe space? A space safe. It's a great question. I'm in the process, I've been in the process, I feel like for like 10 years, trying to like dream up like how to run men's groups. I know people do, and just, if nothing else, I feel like it has to start with whoever is facilitating, whoever has the power in the group to set the precedent or to set the tone. So it's tricky when I think about men leading things, because I really think you need to be willing to really model that vulnerability, that openness, but then also to really get out of the way. I think like men with the power that we hold, anytime we're in leadership, in my mind, I feel like we have to be willing to give it away, if that makes enough sense. But at the same time, I think we have to really own who we are, and set an example for our own process, like our own, what it's like to share our own narrative and experiences of being men. To some extent, I would say also that it has to do with outreach and making it available, like not just expecting men to arrive at your group, but really doing the work of connecting to different communities and saying like, this is what we're doing, like, is there interest, and like, how can we collaborate on this? I think that's just across the board when we're talking about outreach. Those are the first couple things that come to mind. I welcome other people's suggestions too. I have, make sure I'm not missing anyone. Gabe Daly in DC says, I immediately started sorting my male friends into the ones with whom I'd feel comfortable or safe raising the topic and those I wouldn't approach. And then noticing a desire to push myself to explore how I would start a conversation with the latter. Thank you, Gabe. Yeah, it was funny. I brought up some of these topics and questions I run a People of Color group every Sunday locally. And I brought it up into a space, mostly women or femme identified. But yeah, one person shared how they brought up, or a very close friend, someone they'd been friends with for a long time. And one day, I think, not completely intentionally, started talking about patriarchy, and the friend's response was that they just simply he didn't believe that patriarchy existed anymore. And she was sort of dumbfounded, but then at the same time, tried to push through that. And ultimately, it sounds like it really ruptured their relationship, actually, in at least some significant ways. Will contributed, I would be prepared for the man to minimize the value of my question. Responding to that question of what would it be like to approach someone, approach a man with a discussion of gender. Jake says, I think about asking this to my dad. I see him answering reluctantly and painfully, sadness and shame arising. But honestly, it would be hard for me to do, not wanting to see him in that place. Right. And then another person, Anu is saying, I'm afraid of men's defensiveness. When a man in power feels defensive, it can become a dangerous situation for me. I'm afraid that bringing up even the word patriarchy will make them feel attacked. Yeah, I think that's an appropriate assumption. Gary Voot from Burlington, Shambhala, says, I see in men, including myself, the need to control the tone of conversation, having the last word. Yeah, and somebody in my POC group, they were asking me if I did any men's group work, and my response, I don't know if this is some of what you're alluding to, Gary, but I have a natural fear come up just being with other men. And then of course, like certain types of men. And so there's definitely something very intimidating about that with me. I don't know exactly how to resolve that. I don't think it is going to be. Men just trigger a fear response in me, and that comes from different places in my life. Yeah, and I'm very sensitive, especially as someone who facilitates groups in different capacities. Very sensitive to who's controlling the conversation. So that would be triggering for me in different ways. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to make some assumptions about some of the people on this call based on their names, but no pressure whatsoever. Continuing in the chat dialogue, and I'll read them aloud. I'm curious, again, if you're willing to respond, folks who identify as male or as men on the call, if I ask you the question, what do you love about being a man? Question is, what do you love about being a man? Being a father. I also welcome comments like, I don't know how to answer that, or that's complicated for this or that reason. It's curious, right? I'm assuming we have maybe a couple men at least, a couple more men on. And this is not to call you out or anything. I find it hard to answer this question. I think it's, and I also recognize like that doesn't feel like, that doesn't seem like it should be such a complicated question. Daniel writes, that is a question I haven't asked myself before, so I'm surprised. Yep. And Will says, people assume I'm right if I speak. Jake says, I am afraid to answer that. Wow. Cool. Thank you. if there are folks willing amongst the participants to respond, let's say, I'm going to put you together for the sake of time. For anyone who identifies as female or as a woman, or identifies as genderqueer or non-binary, what do you love about that identity, if you wouldn't mind? What do you love about being a woman? What do you love about being genderqueer? Or what do you love about your non-binary identity? So one person says carrying a child. Another person says, I love being in my body. I love that people see me as nurturing. I see someone saying, as a woman, I mostly deeply appreciate being able to be emotionally vulnerable with female friends, openly expressing love, affection, doubt, fear, ambivalence, etc. Another answer was relational connection that is supported throughout life. So I think really, significant and expressive, like at least some of the differences we're hearing here. And again, I don't want to assume too much, but around possibly an identity that can feel pretty central in our life. That for possibly the folks who identify as men, like it's not clear around this central identity. I don't know exactly, or it's not altogether clear what I love about that. How I relate to that. I'm super aware of time, so I really wanted to express my appreciation for people joining in on this. I'm going to try to not apologize to yourself for being such a awkward, emotional human being. Someone wanted to add something I love about men. Men need so much love, and I love loving them. Yeah. And maybe that's really I'm really super curious about this piece for men, like how much how hungry they are for love, for attention, for affection. There's actually, if people aren't aware, there's such a significant, it's been going on for a while, but there's I'll have to look up the specific studies, but it goes back a ways, research on how men misattribute their intense emotions as sexual feelings. That they could be experiencing heightened emotions and mistake them for sexual attraction. And it really makes me wonder how much for men, and I know I'm making these huge generalizations, but how much for men their sexual desires really have to do with sex, and how much actually has to do with a real desire to connect, but have absolutely don't know how to do it. I know that's kind of a reach maybe for some people. I don't think it has to be one or the other, of course, but I'm super curious about that. Anyway, I'm probably too much overtime. And Travis from Boston, it really hurts to know I have such a hard time coming up with something I love about being a man. I really appreciate being asked this question. Thank you, Travis. And Gabriel says, yeah, not a reach at all about maybe men's sexuality. Jake says that's spot on for me. Okay, everyone. So much love and appreciation to you all. Thank you for being with me in this. I welcome dialogue. I really do. I say that wholeheartedly when I do this. Like, I get a lot from connecting with people around these things. So if you want to dialogue in person, online, get in touch with me. Check out sort of the the resource document that I included, and give me some feedback. I'd be happy to talk and discuss any and all of this. So, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for leading us this evening. And thank you to everyone who joined us. We have some groups as well. So thank you, Burlington and Gambo Abbey as well. And hello to everyone who joined us there. Tonight's recording will be available to you tomorrow, and you'll get an email notification about that. And you can access it in the My Programs tab of your Shambhala Online account. I also welcome you to join us next week. Next week we'll have Jane Hare leading us in a discussion entitled Nobody Left Out, the Dharma of Inclusion. So I'm just sending you a link in the chat box. Please do take a look at that. And also all of our past talks have been recorded as well. So if you're interested in listening to any of the talks that you might have missed live, you can find them on the website. Once again, Roland, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, Ashley.
Bye.